Hello, this is the Ebb of Time and I'm Ileana. Today we will be discussing about methane pollution. So what is methane? Basically, methane is one of the greenhouse gases that is produced both naturally and through human activities. Today we will be focusing on the human activities part, and for this I will not be talking by myself because I'm no expert on this issue. Therefore, I have Theophile with me from the Clean Air Task Force, and I want to ask you to introduce yourself. Who are you? Where do you work? What do you do? And why did you start working on methane pollution?
Hey, hey everybody. So my name is Theophile. I've been working for Clean Air Task Force for almost 4 years as the senior campaign manager for the methane pollution prevention team. So what do? We work to fight against methane emissions in all sectors, including agriculture, the main sector in Europe, the waste management systems, as well as the fossil fuel industry and its methane emissions. Me personally, I've been working as one of the field investigators of CATF, going across facilities at Europe's energy networks and documenting methane emissions happening from these facilities in order to show that methane is actually an issue on our continent. And I'm trying to push for policies and best practices to be adopted all across Europe to make sure that we're not emitting.
Perfect. Then I want to ask first thing first, what is methane pollution? Which sectors are the main sources, which you mentioned a little bit, but maybe we can go into a bit more detail on the percentages and etc. And why is it critical that we reduce methane emissions? So basically, why should we care about it?
Yeah, so methane is a bit the forgotten son of other greenhouse gases. So we all speak all the time about CO2. It's the main one, and we often speak about climate change and CO2 overtly without really thinking. So methane is the second greenhouse gas. It's a molecule composed of 1 atom of carbon and 4 atoms of hydrogen. And it's actually responsible for around a third of the heating we've experienced so far since pre-industrial times. So it's absolutely not something to discard. So methane emissions is happening from different sectors. As I said, the agricultural sector, it's around 40% of the emissions, and it's mainly the cow's digestion that in the absence of oxygen within the digestive tract of cows, you have some microorganisms that emit this molecule, this methane molecule. Rice is also another, let's say, big emitter. Rice production is also another methane emitting sector in the agriculture. Then you have the waste sector, kind of same principle as inside the digestive tracts of cows. So you have organic matter that is being decomposed by microorganisms within landfills and wastewater facilities. And in the absence of oxygen, these emits methane, these processes. And this methane just sweeps from the landfill covers into the air. And the last sector, which is the one that we work mainly at CATF, is the fossil fuel industry. So actually methane gas and natural gas or fossil gas is the same thing. In some languages, like in Italian, it's actually the same word, metano. So this gas is the one that we burn in our household. And so when you produce fossil fuels, including also coal and oil, you have methane gas that is also emitted at every stage. So the production stage at the wellheads, at the place where you produce the crude oil or the gas, the raw gas, as well as during the transport of these fossil fuels.
Indeed, it's something that we are heating our homes every day. Agriculture is a big part of, our lives, even though maybe we are not farmers by ourselves, but it is what we eat. And waste management also. Unfortunately, this is a sector that is out of control. We create too much waste, etc. So these big companies are contributing the most, but also we need to have this awareness on the fact that our actions every day or our choices or our political choices are actually contributing to this. So I was checking some reports here and there. Well, I don't want to make it sound big. I was just Googling stuff. And According to IPCC, apparently the increase in our global temperatures, so currently I think it's at 1.5, and 0.5 degrees is attributed to methane. So
Exactly.
this is quite huge, actually. And on another part of the internet, basically from a European Environmental Agency, it was saying that so Europe is basically responsible of 5% of the methane pollution as they put together. And this is just the impact on methane pollution. But then there is also the health impact, and only Europe is responsible of the 10% of the global health impact on this sector. So these are actually very big numbers. But I want to ask you, what is how severe is the impact of methane pollution on climate, on public health? Do we have enough data on this? And maybe a bit indirectly, what is the economic impact if you have this knowledge?
So at the molecule level, 1 molecule of methane, of CH4, is equal to 82 molecules of CO2 within a 20 years period. So it's considered a super pollutant for that very reason. It's that one, basically it just super warm, turbocharged climate change by just having very small emissions. So in terms of quantity of emissions, it's actually not that large. In terms of impact on the climate, it is very large. As you said, a third of the heating we've experienced today, or like 0.5. The impact of Europe needs to be taken into consideration. We need to take into consideration the imports that we have. So the thing is, we often speak about the low methane footprint, if you want, of the fossil fuel industry in Europe. But the thing is, we are also the continent that imports the largest quantity of fossil fuels. So we did actually some calculation at CATF, and we showed that by just having imports regulated, which is now the case thanks to the European Methane Regulation, we can cover we have the potential to cover 70% of the fossil fuel industry, globally, and therefore we would be able, through an import standard, to make sure that there are very low methane emissions happening, to reduce emissions by a very big chunk, actually the emissions from the fossil fuel industry. Why am I saying that? It's just because often when you use percentages of comparison of Europe to the rest of the world, there's a lot of things that are hidden in this, which is the actual impact that can have policies from an importing union, in this case, on the global scale. You were asking about the impact from methane also on health and population. So methane is not really having an impact per se. It actually doesn't really impact human health. The thing is, because it's responsible for the formation of tropospheric ozone, quote unquote, the bad ozone that we keep speaking about, the low, not really high into the sky. This ozone has a large impact on human health. We have estimated around 250,000 human lives that could be saved per year if we were reducing methane emissions from all sectors. So that's nothing, obviously, and this number is coming from the Global Methane Assessment that was produced by the United Nations Environmental Programme, I think in 2021. It's a really good document if anybody wants to read about and learn more about methane emissions from caused by humans. There is another, let's say, co-benefit in mitigating methane emissions, especially from the waste sector as well as from the fossil fuel industry, is that you have a lot of other gases that are being emitted together with methane called BTEC, so called associated gases, like benzene, which is quite famous for bad reasons. These gases are toxic, and they do have a large direct impact on human health through being cancerogenic or causing malformation for fetuses for pregnant women. So by mitigating methane, you actually have a lot of these co-benefits that are also benefiting the local community as well as the people working in these sectors.
The sectors that are causing the methane pollution are basically on the ground, so very linked to the earth. Does methane pollution cause any issues on the soil or on water So is there a polluting aspect that is directly impacting, or is it only at the gas emission level?
So methane doesn't impact water. But it's the same. It comes together. So if you have a poorly managed facility, I think we can already focus on oil and gas production. So let's speak about an oil or gas well. It's more or less the same thing. At the wellhead, meaning at the really basic production unit, the wellhead level, you will have infiltrations of water and you will have air pollution through methane sweeps as well as other gases if the well itself is poorly managed and poorly built. So the two things come together. The water is going to be impacted through infiltrations of pollutants and toxics if the well itself is poorly monitored and poorly repaired. And this will cause also air quality issues, including methane emissions. So I can't say methane has a direct impact on water, except from climate change and the climate catastrophe. But at the same time, mitigating methane emissions imply to have good monitoring systems and good repair systems and good equipment that brings a positive carbon effect on the water quality in areas where you have production of fossil fuels. The thing is, like, it's the same for everything in the environment. Everything is kind of interconnected, and the moment you have a good industrial system, meaning one that also takes care of not leaving behind any traces or any pollutants and focuses on mitigating and preventing risks, generally you end up having no negative externalities from your production system. So yeah, everything is intertwined. It makes the conversation kind of difficult, isn't it? Because then it's difficult to bring everything together.
Exactly. That's why whatever question I have is like either too broad or jumps from one thing to the other, because as you said, it's really intertwined. And indeed, methane might not have, as you said, direct impact on health, on soil, on water. Again, if it caused like 0.5 degrees of increase in the temperature, that already caused a lot of things that we see, like the acidification of oceans, the increasing heat on land, but also on the seas, on water, and that impacts biodiversity. So it's just so big. The impact is so big, and it makes it a little bit hard to actually focus on just one thing. Maybe it's my thing as well.
If I can, but that's the incredible thing about mitigating methane emissions, is that because it's short-lived, 12 years as we said, if we mitigate methane emissions right now, then we will see in our lifetime, in our lifespan, the consequences, the positive consequences, which is slowing down climate change. It is not the case for CO2. So there is a reason why we want to focus so much on short-lived climate pollutants, SLCPs. It's for that very specific reason. There is a direct and clean impact for also the lives that are right now, for people living right now, as well as for the next generation. The focus of, for example, the global methane pledge between the US and used to be the US and the EU, that was the reason, and they're trying to get as many countries on board as possible to reduce by 30% by 2030 for that very specific reason, is that, hey, let's put the brake on climate change first, and then we have the full system change that needs to come with decarbonizing at the same time, but that takes time. So the two things needs to be done together at the same time. But methane mitigation is important to do it right now, so we can make sure that we can decarbonize in the future.
Yeah, and yeah, that's what a wonderful world. That would be so nice.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah, and you said it was between US and Europe, and trying to encourage other countries to join. So can we say that, because this is something I don't know, I wasn't following honestly. So is US still part of it because of this?
The US left. But there are lots of other countries who are doing it, and now it's being led still by the EU. There are more than 150 countries. I need to actually check the numbers right now, but so it's still a good chunk of the countries and all the global emissions that is covered by the Global Methane Pledge. So there are still hope for methane mitigation.
Yeah, for hope, let's skip it. We will discuss that later, if we should have hope and how can we have hope. Coming back to the fossil fuel production. So how is it that exactly methane escapes during the production? Since you particularly focus on this, and how do you discover these leakages? And you also said that it is possible to prevent this. So why was this not prevented already, since we are using these fossil fuels since hundreds of years? And what can be done? So it's just like three parts of the question. How methane leaks? How do you discover this as part of your job? Why this wasn't done, and what can we do? Sorry, it is 4 parts.
That's good. I might forget one of the 2 parts, so please jump in about this. About the first part, so why is there methane from the fossil fuel? Okay, so fossil fuels, so coal being the solid one, oil being the liquid one, quote unquote, and gas being the gaseous one, it's more of a spectrum. So the moment that you have coal production or oil production, you also have some gas that is in the mixture, in the produced. This gas is the methane gas. It's majority methane and some other hydrocarbons and aromatics. So when you produce coal, your main focus as a coal company is to actually extract the solid content. And so actually the gas is just escaping the moment you break the seam. You break the seam of coal, you collect the coal, just gas evaporates from your seam during the coal mine itself, as well as on the coal train, so during the transport of this coal. Similarly, you have something quite similar happening in the oil industry, where when you extract oil, you have this liquid, but actually within the liquid, you have some diluted or like some dissolved gas molecule that is in it. The moment that it's outside in the air, because of difference of pressure, this gas comes out at the production site, at the well, at the storage site, in oil tanks, as well as during the processing of this gas, when you try to actually separate and increase this separation. And finally, in the gas industry, well, as I said, methane gas is the same as natural gas or fossil gas, so you have just leaks happening. And sometimes you release the gas through intentional venting, through intentional releases, in order to make your systems, your gas pipelines and so on, function. So actually, when you look at methane emissions, and according to the International Energy Agency, the main emitter of methane from the fossil fuel industry is the coal industry, then it's the oil industry, and then it's the gas industry. Reason being that in the gas industry, it's what you sell, so you generally emit a bit less. While in the coal industry, it's also a bit more complicated to collect this gas and to make sure that it's not seeping from the massive coal mines that we have. So that's for the emissions themselves. They happened because they are present in the fossil fuel. I forgot your second point, I think.
We already, the second one is already lost.
Right.
So how do you discover those leakages?
So for documenting emissions, which is actually the main part of my activity, is there are lots of different kind of equipment, and you have lots of ways to show methane, depending on what level you're interested. You have in situ instruments, small instruments like called sniffers. It's actually what your boiler man repairing your boiler at home has. It's just a small detector that will be able to show you if there is a methane leak happening. All the way to satellites, and these satellites just use contrasting emissions in order to pinpoint super emitting events. For example, the satellite of the European Space Agency, Topomi, or another one from NASA emit. There are also some private ones.
Is it the NASA one that Trump wanted to go down?
Yes, I think so. No, this one is the CO2 one, I think. But probably the methane satellite is also not going to go really well. So these are like the 2 extremes, and in between you have a lot of other equipment, being spectrometers mounted on cars, mounted on drones, as well as optical gas imaging cameras. And so these optical gas imaging cameras, which are infrared cameras that allows you to visualize methane emissions and pinpoint sources of emissions, these are the ones we use at Clean Air Task Force to, as we say, make the invisible visible, to show that methane emissions are happening from the fossil fuel industry all across Europe. No, actually globally. So these cameras, we have been using them at CATF for almost 5 years now. And the reason why we use them at the beginning was actually because we were being told that in Europe we don't have methane emissions. And so we kind of took the problem in our own hands, and we just went in the field. I think the first countries were Germany, Italy, and Romania, and Hungary. And we just went to visit facilities all across these countries in order to see if we find methane emissions, either from leakages or from voluntary releases. Turning on the equipment doesn't take long to find emissions, actually, at the majority of sites where we were going. So bringing back this data together with some policy solutions, we got the European Commission as well as the other institutions to be interested in the topic of methane from the fossil fuel industry. And so yeah, please.
So the data is quite accessible, actually. The technology
data,
is
yes.
there, but also to discover these leakages, it's quite out there with the satellites, drones, cameras, etc. So it's not like a wow discovery, but it was already there and we already knew about it. So then this brings maybe the third part of it. Why this was not prevented to start with, and can I assume that since, as you mentioned, if I'm producing coal, so I will be using that. If I'm producing oil, that is something that I will use, so the rest is not on my interest. So there is actually no interest for me or business case for me to prevent it, because I don't care if it's leaked or not. Is it right to assume that, or am I just being too, I don't know, evil to think that?
No, I think it's quite correct. I think the main way the fossil fuel industry was functioning hopefully until now, it's a bit hard to believe though, sadly. It was mainly focused on the short-term profit. So when you were an oil company or a gas company, you prefer to drill new wells to have a high increase of production instead of mitigating your methane emissions to increase your production. You reduce your losses, so you increase the product that you sell, which would have a smaller return on investment. Why wasn't it being mitigated before? I think the issue is that this gas is invisible, and methane emissions were kind of in the shadow compared to CO2, and so people were not really interested in the problem of methane. The same way as it has started to be way more visible. I do also need to say that I put quite of this reward, let's say, on the focus by NGOs to also mitigate, like to work on methane emissions. There is this amazing work by also the Environmental Defense Fund in Texas, in the Permian, with Methane Air, it's called, where they showed that methane emissions were actually happening from all the fossil fuel facilities over there. So we kind of replicated this work into Europe. When the gas is invisible and you don't really think twice about it, you don't really think about making it a policy issue. So that was just under the radar, let's say.
We started to, the company started to care a little bit more about it. Is it because of policies, or is it because of these like voluntary pledges? Because there are also some voluntary pledges, but I don't know to what extent they are actually useful and good, because what we see right now is like the moment the political environment changes, companies sometimes decide to roll back on what they promised sometimes. So what do you think works more? Because some people argue that there is too much policy, there is too much regulation. Maybe we should not regulate too much. We need to let the market actually take the action. But then there is on the other side so many unsuccessful experiences. But how is it in the methane pollution sector, can we say, the methane pollution environment?
Well, that's a complicated question. So the two things come together. In the case of methane, it was the regulations actually came quite late. In Europe, we just had the regulation right now in August 2024, and before it was regulated at the member state level, kinda, but some member states had no basically regulation. Everything was in the environmental permit. So the authorization of, let's say, flaring gas or venting gas was more at a really low level, and it was not really accessible law. Even it was more like in the shadow based on environmental permits. In the US, some states were quite precursor in mitigating the emissions, like Colorado. And generally, the EPA has focused quite a lot on this issue, but it wasn't really known. I think there's been a lot of work that's been done from the international organizations on one end, as well as from research institutions or more policy advising institutions, to show that mitigating methane is actually just extremely straightforward, extremely cheap, and extremely simple. So in the case of the fossil fuel industry, it's a lot of like plumbing. At the end of the day, it's about checking leaks and make sure that these leaks are being plugged. So I think it was a bit of an issue that was addressed from lots of sides, including also actually from the industry, but more from companies like companies working on monitoring emissions that try to bring up the case for the business case for mitigating. These were the ones who were also discussing with European institutions at the same time as we were as NGO, just because the technology is ready. The technology is very mature for documenting the emissions. The camera we've been using is 20 years old. It was actually developed in 2005, so it gives you an idea. It's not new, groundbreaking technology. And because this existed, there was a very mature, a very ready field for good regulations. Well, hopefully for good regulations, but at least for doing an action.
What I understand, it's basically one part is the grassroots or the activism part that brought this issue into the agenda, but on the other side, innovation was another thing. So this kind of worked hand in hand to bring this issue to the companies and also to member states, European Union or whatever.
Yeah, because the tech was developed and it's still improving a lot right now. But there has been this kind of a shift towards a more science-based policy making over the past, let's say, 10 years. And so you see it a lot in the methane field where data is backing up a lot policy to the extent that now we are capable of tracking the implementation of the regulation at the operator level within the member states. And so I think this capacity as well as this work would not have been possible some years ago, because the gas, as I said, was not under the spotlight. It's invisible. Mm-hmm. It was poorly reported, and most of the emissions we knew were actually coming from engineered numbers. So you had over your gas pipeline, you knew how many valves and how many specific equipment, controllers, and so on were present. You were just calculating using an emission factor to have an idea of how much were your emissions. And suddenly now we have measurement-informed mitigation strategies, and you can follow and make sure that there is actually a reduction of emissions. And so all these things have kind of backed up the policy and made the case for firstly for the need of it, and now for the implementation of these measures. And
right now I have two questions popping at the same time. I don't know which one to choose. I will start with the one that I assume it will be shorter to answer. So we are talking about methane emission from fossil production, but we also know that, because it's more or less part of my work, my professional work, that transportation and etc. also causes methane emission. And to what extent, I wonder, in the countries that do not have necessarily the most modern infrastructure, there is methane leakage from the pipelines that basically go to our homes, to the industry, and etc. So basically all the pipeline infrastructure in a country, like whichever. Is it also an issue or not as much?
Right, so the majority of emissions are happening at the production level, the upstream level. The transport level, way less. So for the coal and the oil industry, there is a very simple reason: is that most of the methane that could have been emitted already, as left, is already emitted by the time you transport these fossil fuels. For the gas level, it's a bit different for the gas sector. Yet still the majority of emissions are happening upstream because you have this kind of super emitting events that can happen that would just increase dramatically your, let's say, push the balance towards the upstream in terms of emissions. At the transport level, it depends a lot country by country, and I don't think there are numbers even in Europe for this, because it depends on when the pipeline was built, the kind of equipment they've been using. If it's venting by design equipment, meaning the pipeline is supposed to release gas, if it wants to function through gas-driven equipment at compressor stations, the thing that pushes the gas across kilometers and kilometers of pipe, or at interconnectors where you have also emissions that are happening through processes. Nowadays, thanks to also to the new regulation we have in Europe, normally the pipelines are supposed to be equipped with equipment as well as have rules in place, so you don't have really methane emissions. The thing is, it depends again on implementation and compliance with regs. It's a very frustrating kind of work because we don't have numbers and we don't know how much is being emitted. The factor can be extremely important, between like a very small leak rate of like 0.2% all the way to few percentages, depending on countries. What you know is that the biggest is the network, the largest are going to be the emissions, and that you need to have a very good, very good control systems, either through good monitoring as well as just good equipment. I can't really tell you about the quantity of emissions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when I asked this question, I had Romania in mind particularly because, this is how I actually found you on LinkedIn through your work in Romania, but also, I know that in Romania the infrastructure is quite old. There is no enough investment going there, and also there is new projects developing to basically produce gas from the Black Sea, basically, which we know that it is part of claims that the company that is going to build this infrastructure in the Black Sea is known to be having different wells in different places that they left unfinished, uncompleted, or without maybe covering it up. So it's kind of an issue that comes all the time in front of us, and I think like the new gas findings or new gas projects are not helping this at all.
Right.
So maybe.
If I can, so let's go back to Romania. That's a really good example. So you asked a question about the gas pipelines and if they're emitting or not. In the case of Romania, the main issue is actually the oil production. It's not the gas production. From what we've documented of methane emissions, it's mainly gas facilities. And the reason being that, actually most of the oil wells that are producing, they're not connected to any gas system. And the gas is just directly released into the air by the company, by Petrom. And so one of the things we've been seeing is that it's often just because the wells themselves are not connected to a gas system for utilization on site or for whatever processes that could be using this gas. So it's a bit tricky to understand, and we obviously don't want to advocate for more gas infrastructure. That's not our role as NGO. But actually, the fact that the wells are so old, the oil production started more or less during the mid-1850s. They didn't have the gas in mind because the gas was not really a product by then. And so these oil wells that were drilled a long time ago and these marginally producing oil fields have no use for the gas, and they just release it. So the fact that they are gonna drill in the Black Sea, Neptune Deep, I think Neptune Deep, right, is the name of the new gas field. So the fact that they are gonna drill Neptune Deep, and which is gonna be extremely expensive for the company, but also to produce this gas makes little sense, because there's so much gas already that is produced all across Romania. It's just from oil wells that are not connected to any sort of grid. And there would be way more of a case, but it's not that much of a good business case compared to Neptune Deep, to connect these oil wells to the grid system, to the gas system, to the gas system, in order to collect the gas and to use it in the country. Instead, they're going to drill more wells, have a short-term profit, exploit a new reserve with more emissions. Well, one of the solutions would be to mitigate the emissions from the oil industry by collecting the gas and making something out of it. So that's one of the main issues that you find in the fossil fuel industry, is this short-term profit, Neptune Deep, versus a system change that could happen at the Romanian level, which would be adapting the oil facilities to not emitting by collecting the gas and utilizing for the local community. Because generally what you do when you have an oil well that is also emitting gas, you collect this gas, you burn it on site to reduce its emissions, but also to produce electricity or to produce heat, or have even the CHP unit that will serve as a district heating for the local community. I'm not, I don't really fit into the NGO talking points right now, as you can see, because that's the frustrating thing about methane mitigation, is that it's not even that much pushing for radical ideas. It's, hey, you're wasting gas, use it. Like, please just do something about it, instead of warming the climate and just drilling new wells in another location far away that needs to be connected with the gas pipeline, with a new processing plant, with a new storage facility, and so on and so on.
But there is no other way to mitigate methane leakages other than using it.
Okay. I mean, you could be burning it, which is useless, but at least it's not methane, it's CO2 and some other gases. It's called flaring the gas. Nobody really promotes this solution from the academic sector, or anybody with well-reasoned wouldn't do it. If you keep producing fossil fuels, then yes, you need to reduce as much as methane emissions as possible, and what you want to do with this gas is to utilize it. Otherwise, you don't produce. In the case of Romania, I doubt sincerely that they will phase out for production, as it doesn't seem to be the policy of the state. Therefore, they should have a reasoned approach to it, which is at least use it, which is, it's not really a motto, isn't it? But actually, maybe that should be the approach.
But let's imagine in an ideal world that Romania decided not to produce oil or gas or whatever anymore. Yeah, well, my dreams. Do you think still the ideal scenario to mitigate methane emission would be still using these leakages, like the gas that is there? Because do we know how much gas is there after all? Because I'm not sure even if this question makes sense. So what would be the ideal move if in an ideal world this country was tomorrow deciding to not to produce any more oil and gas?
It's a good question. I mean, if there is no production, there are no leakages.
But there are leakages from old wells, no?
Exactly. So that's the thing. These are the emissions that needs to be mitigated. So the moment that Romania will phase out from fossil fuel, if it decides to, there's going to be a lot of legacy infrastructure. It's the thousands and thousands of oil and gas wells that exist across the country. These wells will need to be taken care of. By that, I mean to be plugged. So it takes time to plug a well, and some of them can be quite tricky and challenging from an engineering perspective. So what you need to do is to monitor these wells, being by using equipment like the one we use, and to make sure that they are not emitting, and at the same time plugging them. So it's literally removing the well itself, the metallic part of the well that is deep inside the basin, and to feed it with like gravel and concrete, and to make sure that it's completely sealed, so there are no emissions happening. And these wells, you still need to monitor them to make sure that they are not polluting nor the air nor the groundwater from other infiltrations, or even just rainwater infiltrating into it and creating a potential accumulation of pollutants. So the thing is, the damage has already happened. In the case of wells being drilled, they will very likely emit, except if you have a good monitoring and a good plugging system. That's also actually something that is covered by the methane regulation, and there is technically a plan that needs to be put in place by the member state to make sure that they are mitigating the emissions from the abandoned and orphaned wells through a plugging program. Romania is the main issue all across Europe, because it has so many wells and so many legacy wells that they might actually require years and years of work and monitoring to make sure that the emissions are stopping. One of the good things, if I can say so, is that the actual emissions from abandoned wells are fairly small compared to producing ones. And there is a very logical reason for that, is that there is no, it's like a passive system. It's like gas coming at the same kind of pressure, truly, and there is no suction that would increase the emissions that are happening. So it's around 3%, if I'm not wrong, of the emissions from the fossil fuel industry that are happening from abandoned and orphaned wells. So it's not that much. It's absolutely significant. I'm not saying the opposite. It is significant. I think this number is coming from a study in the US. So it needs to be mitigated, but already stopping the exploitation of fossil fuels, you would reduce a lot the emissions. You know what I mean? It's like something that needs to be taken care of, but it's in place also for phasing out.
I see. And indeed, it's interesting, and as you said, it's not very NGO kind of thinking to say that, okay, there's gas there, so maybe use it, which also, like, I believe that we should phase out fossil fuels totally. And but what you say actually sounds logical.
So if I can, there is one thing also to think. So when you do plumbing, you can do it right now. And so the thing about mitigating methane emissions, like that, use the gas instead of wasting it, it's something that they can do right now. Actually, tomorrow, there is a potential for a technician to go on site and to look at valves and to make sure that the valves are properly closed on site. I'm not asking for the moon, by that. And so that's the reason why in the conversation about phase out or not phase out, methane mitigation should actually should be just considered differently. Methane mitigation needs to happen no matter what position you might have about phase out, because the two comes together. You mitigate right now, and at the same time you change your system, and then the system change. It's a political decision, I feel. Well, methane mitigation shouldn't be one, and that's why companies also should be mitigating their emissions.
Yeah, but as you also said when you talked about the Neptune Deep, it's completely illogical, expensive, and just a show off. It is what it is, because I mean, if you have that much money to invest, you can easily invest this on renewable energy, whatever source you want. You have sun, you have wind, you have all the things in Romania. It's a very nice climate for that. But again, this is a political choice. This is a political choice to have this short-term profit for a company, for a particular company that is investing in it together with the government. So we need a political change. We need actually to react to this, but we also need to understand that this is not on people's benefit, because as you said, new production will mean more CO2 emissions, more methane leakages, methane emission. But how it is presented is like, we need this project because this is for our energy security. But then what you mention is there is already free gas leakage around the country. So, well, if you're talking about energy security, that's like quite some. So it's not on the sea where Russia has a shore, basically. So it totally makes sense to do that. But then, because I remember when we talked before, you mentioned that most of these abandoned wells do not even belong to companies that still exist. So most of them are long gone. So that will practically mean that those wells belong to the state, so to the people. So actually there will be no company to profit from using this gas.
I need to say I'm not a specialist of property rights. And for sure, it's the responsibility of the state to deal with the emissions that are happening from them. In terms of profits or potential profits, I'm sure there is a legal and economic way to actually probably bring it back to the national producer or something like that. And they would very likely find a legal solution. I'm not really worried about them. Hey, you can use a well and you can produce fossil fuels from it. I'm not really worried about the Romanian company being able to put their cards down. On why they don't do it, I think it's a political choice. That's completely true, and I think the policymakers were sold a project. It's often like that, it's always shinier to build a new facility compared to fixing the leaks that you have all across your country, and it's also quite invisible. I need to say that the past time I went in the field in Romania, and we go to Romania one or twice a year with the campaign for the past 4 years. It's the place where we have documented the most methane emissions all across the fossil fuel industry in the country. I do see a change in the facilities. So there is a lot of modernization as well as upgrading of facilities. It is not because the company is particularly nice or because the state decided to be environmentally friendly. It's also due to legal obligations. So now that we have this methane regulation in Europe, when you speak with facility technicians and managers all across Romania, they are like, we don't want to pay the fine. We don't want to have an issue with that. So we have to do it. So it's quite difficult to believe that there's going to be new production, while at the same time they're already going to collect all this gas that is happening all across the country. I wouldn't be really surprised if they didn't really account for all the things they're going to collect, because I'm not really sure they knew how much they were leaking before. That's something to see also in the upcoming years, and actually how what's the production of Romania for gas. I would be really surprised if Neptune Deep is a very profitable project. It sounds a bit more to me that it was well sold for energy security during a political context that is extremely tricky, and where a lot of member states are signing off and agreeing on projects out of fear.
It's this that yeah, well, that gets me really mad. So okay, maybe we're drifting apart from the methane discussion,
Yes.
but as you said, I also don't think that this will be, well, there are numbers. Also, environmentally, it's a catastrophe. So anyways, but it will not be as profitable as it is sold. But it's maybe even not about the profit. It is about this making Romania this gas and oil producing country, because now we don't want to import anymore from Russia. We don't have partners. So where can we import from? So bringing actually this country as an important actor, and with these big projects, it's also kind of polishing the ice, basically, like making it look strong, and big investments and big opportunities. Even the minister was so excited when this was happening, and he was very happy when Greenpeace lost the case, for instance. But yeah, whatever. So we are still, yeah, the policies are still shaped from this like very old thinking of this glorious gas and oil production. This is what we need to move away from. This is the system change I think we need, because as you said, if there is a leakage that is going to the air anyways, and if there's a possibility to use it to heat homes, and probably for cheap, because as you said, this can be done tomorrow. So it means that actually this is a cheap resource. I mean, I'm 100% sure. Yeah, exactly. So if we really want to talk about energy security, the energy security means that you give people affordable energy to heat their homes and etc., or to the industry to be able to produce and blah blah blah. You know, all this story that we are talking about. So the problem is not that we don't have options or we don't have solutions. It's just that we don't want to use them because we are so locked in the system that we pay so much from our public money to these fossil companies. Yeah, okay, I will stop ranting on this.
No, I understand. That's for me the thing that I really like with methane mitigation is that it's actually quite boring as a topic because the solutions are quite boring. You know, if when you speak about plumbing, you don't really excite policymakers. But that's what we're trying to do with like these conversations is, hey, we're actually releasing quite a lot of gas all across Europe. Maybe we need to stop doing that and have good equipment instead and make sure that we fix the leaks. And when you bring them in on site, I have this example in Italy where I brought some policymakers from the Senate, from different political colors all across the board, the political spectrum. And there was a children playground right next to a very small valve station. So it's the gas pipeline where you have few valves and you can just shut down the pipeline for maintenance or whatever. So these valves, 4 of them were leaking a lot. And by leaky valve is just a valve that is poorly closed. You know, it's nothing particularly exciting or very technological. So I documented the emissions, and they were with a journalist on site, and they couldn't believe it. Like, oh wow, there's gas. You can see it goes in front of this playground. It's really bad and potentially dangerous. And they asked me if they can call the emergency number on the door. There is always an emergency number in case of a problem at a gas facility. By law, it's normal. And I let them obviously call the number. I'm like, why wouldn't you? I'm not the one gonna control you. I just don't speak Italian, so I can't call it myself. They call it, and a technician is dispatched within 20 minutes. And he comes and he starts spraying some soapy water. And the reason for spraying that is that you check if there are bubbles that are gonna pop. That would show that there is a gas leak. So when we speak about methane detection technologies, we are really not really technological. We're speaking about water and soap. Yes, I let everybody judge. They found the emissions, and then the technician just went directly to work and started fixing the pipeline. And these 2 senators were like, okay, that was it. Like, yeah, that's how you do methane mitigation. You just saw right now what's called a leak detection and repair program, where you have initial detection, intervention, repair, first attempt to repair, and that's it. I couldn't really check if the repair was successful or not, but I trust technicians on site, they do a good job. Just because I didn't want him to be stressed. You already have a journalist, a guy with a camera, an optical gas imaging camera, and 2 senators, exactly. So you don't really want them to do a mistake because I don't want to have I have safety in mind for the workers. What I can tell is that's methane mitigation 101. It's complicated to get people to understand how simple it is, but at the same time, how changing it is for the emissions. It's the same kind of things we see all across Romania. It's the same thing we see all across Europe. Most of the facilities we go to, including in Germany, in Denmark, in places where I'm not only saying for Southern and Eastern Europe, not at all. It's all across the continent. It's the same issues we document. It's the same solutions. That's why I'm kind of hopeful about the regulation, to go back to the hopeful word that I said at first. I want to see if it's going to be implemented, and that's the reason why we continue to check sites. I was just in the field last week, so I can say. I just want to see the same practices in place, you know? Well, not the soap.
Yeah,
Nobody's new technology, but yes.
I mean, if soap works, soap, then,
It's an easy and cheap one.
But it's very interesting. Yeah. And it's very interesting, like the story you told, because it took them just to see that this leakage was next to a playground. So it took them that to care about it and then take an action about it.
Yep.
Which is positive. They could have just be like, oh, okay, I don't care.
No,
I don't know if you can do
care.
that when you're next to a playground. Yeah.
There is one good thing that I think we all kind of got educated is that gas leaks or dangerous, and it's a bad thing. And I think we all learned this in school and think we need to expand this idea from our kitchen all the way to our towns and where we live. If you smell also gas in the street, it means there is a gas leak that needs to be addressed. It's something that actually calling the number is an important. It's almost like a call for action. There is actually a reason why I'm doing also some sort of a call for action. There is this Article
I'm
7.
gonna come to that, yes.
Are you gonna come? Okay, I'm happy about it.
Don't spoil.
Go for it.
No, I'm actually, because like the time is going,
Ticking.
so yeah, I will almost wrap it up. But well, okay, one call to action for me is plumbing is the new sexy.
Yeah.
But yeah, jokes aside, I want, because this is how I try to end most of my episodes, because yeah, we talked about it. We hopefully learned something, and there is so much to learn more. But what can we do? What can I do? Because I mean, I'm not Ursula von der Leyen. I'm not the president of Romania. So, and yeah, as you said, it's all over Europe. But we talked about Romania because, well, first, it's my country, and second, you were there recently. But what can we do at individual level, at community level? And then that goes like, that's where it starts. And then you go, and it goes to the macro level, to the policymakers' agenda, basically.
Already knowing about methane emissions and being able to read a little bit more about other emissions than CO2, it's super important because it makes you understand how our collective behavior and our collective consumption system has also an impact beyond just burning fossil fuel emits CO2 or using our car or taking our planes. There is also through our alimentation, our food system. Then you have the emissions from agriculture, or how we actually use our waste systems, our trash bins, and why there is a reason why we're being told to not put organic waste together with recyclable. Just because it does emit a lot of methane within the landfills, and it also makes it way more difficult to recycle. But it's the same way for the fossil fuel industry. What I was saying, what we've learned about gas leaks being a matter in our homes, actually we need to expand this way of thinking all the way to our surroundings, towns, as well as generally where we are. If you see something that it's mismanaged, or there is a hissing sound next to a gas pipeline, or you see clearly valve or an equipment that is damaged, where there is pressure inside, generally you can just hear it. There is a possibility to alert the operator of this facility and to use these emergency numbers, as I said, by just calling. There is another way, which is through the Article 7 of the Methane Regulation that I keep mentioning, the European Methane Regulation. So Article 7 actually created the system of a complaint where individuals can go to the competent authority, to the authority that is responsible at the member state or at the regional level in the country, in order to submit something that appears to be breaking the methane rules that we have at the European level. Being a flare, the burning stack at the oil and gas facility, the stack might be burning for 24 hours straight, every day. That's something that might actually not be legal and might actually not be compliant. That can be reported to make sure, and then the competent authority makes sure that this is legal or not. And if it's not, the issue is supposed to be addressed. I know going through the authorities, I think it can take some time, but actually it's really useful for the people who are working in making sure that these rules are being implemented. And there is another way, which is to also communicate with the organizations that are working on methane mitigation at the member state level and to provide all these elements, because we can't be everywhere. I'm alone doing optical gas imaging across Europe. I'm always interested in knowing what's happening in everywhere across the continent. So having this information are super useful to make sure that civil society is capable of doing its job of safeguarding and monitoring the implementation of good rules.
Well, this is actually a very nice call to action, because I work in the EU policy environment, whatever you bubble, whatever we call. And I actually did not know about this Article 7 and
This is of the regulation, of the methane
complaints.
regulation. Yeah, the complaint
Yeah,
mechanism.
but I didn't know because I quickly scanned the methane regulation for my work, but it wasn't relevant for me to read all of those or... So yeah, I was not aware. And I'm in Brussels, where EU policy is made. I was not aware. So that is also another problem. One thing is that people don't really trust the institutions at this point. Maybe they will be like, okay, I take my time to make the complaint. Will someone even care? But this is when we consider people already know about it. So we actually also need to make people aware that this article exists and there is this mechanism that you can make complaints.
Yeah, completely. That's for me, it's one of the most interesting elements that exists in the regulation, and I'm really kind of excited to see how the regulators are gonna put it in place and if it's gonna be used or not. I know that across Europe, it has been triggered a few times already, and so I'm kind of monitoring to see a bit what's going on with it. But I think that's a really important element to it, as it gives also the right for citizens to know a bit what's going on in facilities that are in the surroundings where they live. So that's great.
Well, I only hope that this information reaches the people. So basically, member states take the responsibility to actually inform the citizens that these kind of mechanisms exist. Because if you don't know about it, it's probably like NGOs and grassroots movements that will probably trigger these mechanisms. But for this to reach the people, first of all, they need to be informed about what is methane emissions, why do we need to care, and so exactly what we talked during this episode, but in every language, basically, because we wanted to reach everyone in rural areas and etc. So it's indeed a big and important work on this. So before we wrap up, before we close, basically, do you have anything else that you want to add, or any point that you were thinking, oh, I wanted to say this, but I couldn't say it, and maybe I say it now?
I actually don't.
Anything, but if there's nothing, that's also fine. No?
I actually don't know.
You said everything you had in mind.
Yes.
Okay, that's perfect. So yeah, I think we can slowly close it. I wanted to thank you first for joining me, for making time for this podcast twice, which is the behind the scenes part. But also I want to thank you personally for your work on this very important issue, for discovering these leakages, for bringing those Italian senators next to the playground, I don't know, for considering safety of workers. I think this is a very important work. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, Ileana.
And thank you for the listeners. I hope this was useful, triggering, that would lead to maybe some further research and etc. That I would be very happy if it caused some impact. So thank you for listening.